Welcome to Ask the Expert. I'm Sue Pahl, the CEO of Shift Coaching and the creator of the Shift Corporate Coach Program. With me, my guest is Sean Forkan. Sean is the Vice President of Security Sales worldwide at VMware. Sean has almost a 30-year career in the technology industry. So welcome, Sean.
Thank you, Sue. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So can you give us a little bit of your background and tell us about some of the positions, leadership positions you've held and kind of how your career has unfolded?
So, kind of fortunately or unfortunately, I graduated in the 90s and had a degree in electrical engineering and a degree in business. And it was at the height of one of the recessions. And so I found it really hard to get that first job out of university. And I remember at one point sitting down with the on-campus recruiter, and she said, "Would you consider doing a job in sales?" And I was mortified. I couldn't imagine spending 5 years and putting all that work in, only to end up being, like Herd Parlick on WKRP, if you can remember that far back. I'm sure many of your
I
viewers won't know
do.
who that is. And I thought, no, I couldn't do that. That's not who I was. And what she said to me was, she said, if you do inside sales, you're more like a technical advisor. Would you consider that? And I said, sure. And so sure enough, I took my first job, in the burgeoning computer resale business in the 90s as an inside sales rep, and really thrived, right? Really thrived at that balance between solving business and technical challenges. And I got promoted very, very quickly. I quickly pivoted from selling kind of products, right, or reselling products, to getting into services. And so started to work on what I call small scale consulting engagements, kind of 100, 200,000 fees would have been a big deal. Did that for a little bit, and ended up getting an opportunity to work for a company called SHL System-House, which is morphed into another organization since then. But in SHL, I really got to cut my teeth on large customer transformation projects. Did my first really big project for me, which would have been $50 million at the time. I was a summer in the UK, came back and took that experience and applied it to more deals. I won a big outsourcing deal, and then was afforded the opportunity to go into Big Five Consulting. A couple of them had approached me to come in. The deal was one level below partner, and we'll make you partner in a couple of years. And so I went and did that. I did some other wonderful things. I worked on a proposal for $3 billion, a transformational outsourcing proposal, which was great. I was running a team of 50, which was an interesting experience. And then they were asking me, hey, we really want you to run a North America CRM practice. And, at the time we'd struggled with pregnancy at the time. So having a child was really, really important to me. And we were due to have our first, and my choice was, spend all my time on a plane, or a company called Cisco called and said, hey, we've got an opportunity. It's an individual contributor role, but we'll pay as much as a first year partner. And that really was the basis for kind of a 10-year run, and kind of foundational to my leadership experience. So started as an individual contributor, took a lot of that consulting DNA and applied it to selling, essentially infrastructure. And then got my first opportunity at what I'll call Messy, which I've kind of made a career of. I was presented with an opportunity to pick up a business that was the worst performing business for Cisco worldwide, right? Canada at the time was the only team that was shrinking this business, or these lines of business worldwide. Everybody else was experiencing, significant growth. And but for me, it was great. I got to come in with a blank sheet of paper and work on everything from go-to-market strategy, channel strategy, role clarity. Started to experiment with things around bidirectional accountability. So not just top-down dictating roles, but setting expectations of what individuals should expect of first or second line leaders. And had a kind of a track record of tremendous success. I got tagged as hypo, and so they gave me even more responsibility. I was given a field marketing team that was 35 strong, roughly 8 million discretionary spend per year. And I remember I wasn't really keen on doing that role, but the moment I said yes, they said, that's great, it's yours, fire all of them, right? They're all terrible people. And that turned out to be a total fallacy. They just needed a little bit of direction. And so, we applied some of the principles around, having the team kind of co-author a fact-based plan, led that turnaround, and then did some global work. There was a time when Cisco was thinking about doing a JV with one of their SI partners. So I led that piece of work on the Cisco side, and then started to really go into messy after messy after messy.
Yes.
I was approached to go work for Oracle and try and help them, figure out the Sun Microsystems acquisition. And then I was given an amazing opportunity at Symantec as kind of the VP and general manager. Very interesting, complex business. You would be dealing with government affairs in the morning, talking public-private partnership. Your marketing person would talk about demand gen, but they'd also be talking about the shelf space in a Best Buy because you still bought CDs for Norton Antivirus back in the day. And then I might have customer meeting and a channel program review that would talk about, everything from the global CISOs, like the Accentures of the world, down to, some of the traditional security partners that existed in market. And then more messy at Veritas when I helped design a business that was splitting into two. Mm-hmm. And then joined VMware and kind of take us to almost current day about 4 years ago to help them turn around their Canadian operation. And then earlier this year, I was asked to step into a fairly recent acquisition that VMware did, which was Carbon Black, which is the basis of our security business unit. Mm-hmm. Joined the team back in the late January timeframe, leading the Americas, and recently, a week ago, was asked to take on that team on a worldwide basis. So,
wow. Well, that's quite a career that you've had. You gave us 30 years in about 2 minutes there. But
that's what happens when you're old, Sue. Right? When you're old, you have lots in the bucket. So.
Yes, that's that. Well, I can't deny that, Sean. Can't deny that. Well, today we're going to talk about that connection between coaching and sales leadership. And as you've described throughout your career, you've had a lot of opportunities to deal with messy and a lot of opportunities for coaching. And I think one of the things that I know about you is that your people really matter to you. So the customers matter, the products, the services matter, but what's at the heart of it for you is really the people on your team. And so when they need you, you're there. And even if there's an issue, you're there. And even if they don't need you, you're still there helping to support and develop them. So can you talk to me a little bit about, why the people are at the center for you?
So it kind of starts with, when people say, what's your overall leadership philosophy? Like, how do you lead teams, right? And I say the first part of it, starts out with having a strategy, kind of having a Northern Star that's going to guide the teams in terms of what you're hoping to achieve, right? Couple keys to that. One is the strategy needs to be fact-based, right? So if your market's growing at 10% a year, don't stretch the team to say we're going to grow at 800% a year magically without some sort of disruption. So it's usually market plus growth, right? Can we be more effective and actually advance our market share based on how our market is expanding? The other key in that is it's got to be a co-authored plan by the team, and this is the critical part, right? It can't be me as the senior leader. It can't be my plan. Right. If it's my plan, nobody buys into it. And so I always bring in a facilitator. I happen to have someone special I've worked with for now well over 20 years, and she knows me well. And we make sure that the team feels fully vested, bought into, and is heard. All their ideas I heard before we agree to kind of a set of priorities that come out. There's other things I do around that, but suffice it to say, I always say, strategy, while important, it's kind of for me the easiest part of the job, right? The line I use is the world is littered with PowerPoint that didn't go anywhere. And so the second kind of element to how I lead teams is really having I call it an operating model or a rhythm to the business, right? Things need to be predictable in nature, right? Nobody likes fire drills, right? It's highly ineffective, highly disruptive, and so meetings for a given quarter. I've always been part of publicly traded companies, so we kind of run a 13-week cycle. Every kind of review is pre-calendared. The agenda is preset. It is always well-known, well-documented what artifacts we'll use. And it always balances between short and long, and usually other things like, back when we actually got to spend time with each other, we talk about community, like what are we doing for the community event in a particular geography for a quarter, but all very, very predictable in nature. And so with strategy and operating model kind of leads me to the third leg of the stool. And that's really, how do you help create a culture where the teams show up to work 9.5 times out of 10 and they're excited to be here?
Right.
Because if you can do that, you create a high performing culture, right? And in fact, I think you mess up on your strategy and your operating model, but if you mess up on the people piece, you always underperform. And so that's why, if I bring it back to even strategy, right? One of the cores of any of the growth strategies I've ever put in place through the last, probably 20 years has a focus around people and culture.
Right.
And that has kind of brought us to, why you and I started to work together
Mm.
10+ years ago now, is it?
Right. Yeah.
So yeah. So yeah, that hopefully that gives you a bit of context too.
Fantastic. Well, also, I'd like to know, you've always used coaching, as I can, at least for the last 10 years, as an important tool for your people. So, can you tell me a little bit about why coaching? And I'll just leave it there. Why coaching?
Yeah, so I think instinctively I knew, so kind of at your core, sometimes we overcomplicate things, but I think instinctively, I like people to be, I like to treat people how I'd like to be treated in their role, right? And so, I knew early on that, I wanted somebody to tell me, hey, here, Sean, here's what you aspire to achieve, right? Here's what kind of good looks like, right? Both kind of short and long. How you get there, though, we want to leave you creativity to go solve. I knew that's what I liked as an individual contributor. And really where it got formalized for me is I had the privilege of working for an outstanding CEO in my career. He was one of those classically trained Center for Creative Leadership folks. And he formalized it for me, for lack of a better term, where he said, your role is not to do things for everybody, right? Your role is to build capacity in the system. And he used to talk to us about the need to balance between inquiry versus advocacy, right? And he gave us real examples where he would lean in and inquire and inquire and inquire and inquire, even though he knew the answer, because he knew if he could get the person to figure it out on their own, there'd be additional capacity over time.
Absolutely.
So when you think about, in technology, in every industry, I think now is similar, but in technology in particular, it changes so quickly.
Yes.
If you're not growing and developing, right, yourself and your team, you get left behind very, very quickly, right? And I developed that paranoia very early in the 90s.
Yes.
And so, kind of learning and growing has always been core. And then when coaching came in is I think you need to give people a framework, right? I think you can say, hey, it's good to tell me, Sean, that you want me to ask more questions than tell people what to do. But I don't need to, I need to know where to start, right? And so, I've always liked this process whereby let's ground, right, in an assessment, and you and I've used one through the years that's been very beneficial, right, to kind of ground the individual of, hey, like, what do you need to know about yourself? What do you need to be self-aware of?
Mm-hmm.
And then to arm them with a structure and to see them what good coaching looks like, and that helps extend to the team, into the culture, and then back to the ever important performance at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well, do you have any examples of, people that you've had working for you where coaching has made a difference? Like a couple things you can think of.
Yeah, it's funny you asked that. So I was on a phone call last week, it's Friday,
Mm-hmm.
with someone who worked for me, who you coach. You're involved. Your team was involved in coaching them,
Yeah.
and they went from being kind of a classic first line sales leader, one who was probably more teller and yeller than true coach,
Mm-hmm.
to the point where I was calling them up to say, hey, I've got an America's role I'm looking to backfill myself. Would you be interested? And kind of the good news, bad news story is he said, Sean, first I'd say I can't because I just accepted an America's role at another company. And I felt great for him because he'd been able to grow, such that he was able to take on that kind of role. But he kind of apologized because he said, Sean, it's the work that we did, and it wasn't for a long period of time. I think it was only with them for a year or two. But he goes, we learned, right? And he mentioned another one of his peers. He goes, we all talk about how much we learned when we got to work with you, and how you made us kind of the leaders that we now are today. And I think there's a lot of things that go into that, right? One is, not being a yeller and teller, and kind of asking lots of questions, even though I think I know the answer sometimes, which I catch myself on, but encouraging people, right, to have that kind of culture. And if I play more of a coach to them and not telling them what to do every day, that hopefully permeates down and it extends. And so that's kind of one from literally, I had that phone call Friday with this individual, and those kinds of things are, at this stage, kind of what you love to hear, right? Like that you've had a true impact and really helped grow, like a team, a leader, and an organization such that they've got all this additional capacity. I just, I thought it was a good example, Sid. So
A fantastic example. Well, it sounds like you really are a coaching leader. So, more than just hiring coaches to coach your people, you've actually taken on that role yourself as well. So, you do use professional coaching as required, but it seems like you've actually become a coaching leader yourself. So, how has that paid off for you, your teams, and your organization, would you say?
um, so one of the things is your ability to attract talent. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's, so I mentioned I'm in these messy situations often where the path is undefined. There's usually a track record of underperformance. There's morale, HR issues, right? But I can tell you, because I also had this call on Friday, because of partially probably because of the style of leader I am, and kind of the track record of success. People believe that you're going to be capable of doing great things, and they want to be a part of that. So it helps you attract great teams. The woman who's running operations for me, she and I've worked together now for like 10 years, right? And she's followed me from role to role to role, right? I talked to a woman yesterday, last week. I'm trying to hire a very senior systems engineering role, pre-sales. And she's looking at other opportunities, but she's like, if you can make this work, I would love the opportunity to partner with you again, right? And then even yesterday, when I shared, I was interviewing somebody for a role on my team. Kind of same thing. Like, people, I think, like to be a part of that. Like, they, when somebody's, open and transparent, but hey, things aren't easy, it's messy, but we're going to try to have some fun together. And this is the style of person I am, and here's my expectations of you. And they kind of align with that. You can do great things. So
Well, how about when times get tough? And I know you've worked in a number of places where times did get pretty tough. I think whether it was the quotas were crazy ridiculous or the organization was coming together and then spreading apart. So, how do you actually apply some of those skills in those tough times? Because it's hard to be, the nice guy, the supportive guy when times really are tough.
So you can't deviate from it, is the honest answer, right? You have to kind of lean, and especially when people have times where they're exceptionally frustrated, right? Systems aren't working,
Right.
they're not winning because there might be product issues or pricing issues or whatever issues, right? And I sometimes I just do the basic ones, going, hey, what'd you learn? What would you do differently, right?
Right.
But
Right.
you gotta give them the oxygen, I find, to let them kind of unload, right? Like, get that frustration out. And so that's what I've been effective at through the years. And then try and take that in and say, okay, how do we drive a different outcome, right? To kind of get them path on the, hey, I can, yeah, that sucked, but we're going to live to fight another day. We're going to find a way to go solve this. I don't know the answer, but I know I've got, someone who's going to support me, and I can come to any time, and they're going to help me work through this, right? And
Right.
they're not going to always tell me what to go do, but they're not really looking for that, right? They're looking for more, hey, let me vent, and maybe guide me a little bit. But yeah, so that's historically what I've done. And there've been times where people are elevated in tone, right? And it doesn't always work perfectly every time, but I think you have to stay grounded in it, in tough times. I will say, right, when I first got trained on coaching, um, you want to make sure you have time for it, right? It's like, like if you get a gunshot wound and you show up to emerge, you don't want the surgeon asking people, hey, what do you think? Like, you need people jumping in, and right. And so I always stress that there's balance. Like, sometimes they need leaders to make very, very quick decisions. And then, but more often than not, right, staying in that coaching mindset and that coaching philosophy and continuing to ask good questions will always yield a better outcome, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. And there's really only two ways to get work done: either do it yourself or have other people do it, right? And so the
Right.
way to get other people to do it and not come to you constantly asking for guidance and support and direction and the command and control style, it sounds like you kind of lead beside people, not necessarily in front of them, not necessarily behind them, but with them. And you take that very much of a collaborative approach to support them to figure out, what's next. So, how does that apply to sales leaders specifically? Why do you think coaching is important for sales, for that sales function?
Well, I think it's important for all functions, but in particular, in sales, right? You can get, we're on this 13-week cycle, right? And oftentimes when I take over teams, one of the things I find is they become completely nearsighted,
Mm,
right? They lose the concept of balance, right? And balance is both short and long,
yeah.
but it's also people, right? It's like, taking the time to have a coaching conversation with them about their career. What do they think they want to do next, and why do they think that's important to them, and how might we might go about doing that together, right? And so all of that has to come together, right? And then the classic first line. So the toughest transition most books or leadership will tell you is going from individual contributor to first line leader,
Right.
right? And I made these mistakes because you get that job because you're so awesome, right? And so you think you can tell everybody what to do. And good thing I was a learner, because I tried that going in, because I was asked to build a plan, and I told the team what the plan was, and they more or less said that plan sucks,
Yeah.
right? And so I said, okay, I could kind of try and dig in because I'm now the boss, or I can, okay, well, why do you think that, right? And so whether it be how do you balance short and long, how do you continuously learn, right? How should we be preparing for the deal, right? What do you think those executive care abouts or those client care abouts are going to look like, right? I think knowing that if you can take the time, right, and build that capacity, right, and create that environment where people learn, right, it can be truly powerful. So
Mm. Well, and it is hard in sales because it can be a roller coaster ride for people. It's very volatile and very out in front. So everybody can see the numbers. Everybody knows. You don't always see what's happening behind the scenes in organizations, but often sales is out there, and everybody can see if you're doing well or if you're not. And as a leader, leading a team like that, it can be quite an emotional roller coaster. So, how have you used coaching to support them through that kind of a process?
so it's um so I do two things, right? Some of it's related to coaching, some of it's not. So the actually actually, it is embedded in the process, so let me stand corrected. So the first thing is, I'm very open with people around, there's a what and a how to your role,
Hmm.
right? There's a what and a how, and how does it get measured. And the reason that's important is there's not a single sales professional on the planet that has made every single quarter, right? Just it doesn't happen for a variety of reasons, right? And so the line I've used, it's not the best terminology, but I said, if your what sucks, make sure your how is strong, right?
Right.
And so if you're going to have a bad quarter, right, are you doing the right things around building longer term opportunities for customers? Is your training plan up to date? Are you doing the right things with your partners? Is your Salesforce hygiene clean,
Hmm.
right? I'm like, if you get A's on all of that and a C or a D here, you're okay. But what you don't want is the bottom, right? The coaching element of that is making sure that all the leaders,
Hmm.
right, are bought into what good looks like, right? So what does it take to get an A, right? What do you think, right? And so I went through that process again, when I landed in the Americas role, because there wasn't a lot of guidance around this. I said, okay, well, what does good look like,
Hmm.
right? What should pipeline look like at a quarter? Never mind what sales operations is telling me. What do you, as the leader for U.S. enterprise or U.S. Fed or LATAM or Canada or commercial, what do you think that needs to look like,
Right.
right? And there was a little nudging, like, if they said, oh, a big deal is X, I'd say, well, maybe it's a little higher. Let's see if we can't stretch people a little bit. But they felt fully vested in saying, okay, I know what it takes to get an A on both the what and the how for my teams. And I think if I walked in, and we ended up where I kind of thought we would, but I would have had the buy-in, right? Unless I asked each one, what do you think it takes to get an A, right?
Absolutely.
So
Shared common knowledge, shared common language, and had a shared goal. And
correct.
you said you brought it from within them as opposed to putting it on top of them.
Which is like, and there's so much more bought into it, right? And and that was the learning for me, right? You co-author both the strategy and the op model. And then, when you think about, diversity, equity, and inclusion and developing people and getting back to the community, same thing, right? You continue to kind of use that, embed that through everything, right? And people, like, if they enjoy, who they work with, and they get to work on interesting things, right? They'll put up with some bumps in the road, right?
Right.
But if they have a horrible boss who's just yelling at them every day, and the systems don't work, and product issues, and they're getting yelled at by their boss, they have way too many choices, right? Way too many choices.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you talked about when you were working somewhere and you inherited a marketing team and they said, you can get rid of them all, but you didn't.
No.
So can you just talk me through that one a little bit? Because I'm just curious, because if you almost had permission to start again, it felt like maybe you could just bring in all these superstars, but you chose not to. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, and that one is interesting because that became foundational for my process much later, right? So the first thing that I do whenever I inherit a new team is I spend time with frontline staff in the field. I go to see them and I try to get to know them as people, and I try to get them to tell me a little bit about their business. And that really started with the marketing team, right? Yeah. And so I spent time with all of them and heard their frustrations, and a lot of them were, I'm not respected, I'm not valued. The people in corporate in the US, right? I can't get time of day with them. And then I talked to the folks in the US marketing, and they just said, listen, they don't really do anything, and we have no sense of what they're trying to do. And so the process I went through is I brought in this facilitation partner of mine who works on strategy. We sat down and said, hey, how do we help them build their plan, right? It's totally their plan. It's not the leader telling them their plan, it's their plan. And so this is in the back of the days of pagers. I think it was pager anyways. And so what would happen is we decided to leave me out of the room because there was a sense from the team that they were marketing practitioners and I was a sales professional, and sales was always telling marketing what to do, right? And sales would say, go do this. And they kept getting steamrolled by sales. So what we agreed to do was to kick me out of the room for the entire session. But if the team got stuck on a problem, I'd get paged, I'd walk into the meeting, right? I'd get briefed quickly and make the decision, and the team could move on, right? But everybody felt like they were heard, and we just kept the planning process going. And that became their plan, right? And what I told them, I would not hold them accountable to results per se, but to measuring the results, right? Towards execution. So, someone said to me, hey, I need $100,000 to go do this. And I'm like, what's the impact going to be? And they said, well, it's going to affect this part of the business. I said, when are we going to know if this was successful or not? She's like, oh, it'll be a year from now. And I'm like, okay, open up your laptop. We're going to book the meeting a year from now, and you're going to tell me whether or not this was a good investment. And so that worked really well. And then I was in a meeting with my peers who I'd been working with for a while. And one of them said, hey, I need more money for a golf event. And I said, go F yourself in front of everybody in the room. I'm like, I'm not the piggy bank. Right. And so it was kind of that balance. They felt they had somebody who believed in them, who wanted to hear their voice, who respected and valued them, who asked them a lot of questions, because I was learning a whole new function. I'd never run marketing before. Right. And I let them build their plan, right? I just provided, someone to help them and the oxygen, and they wildly delivered, right? They ended up being the worst. They started as the worst respected marketing team in probably the world. And at the end of it, we were turning away money, right? We couldn't the corporate kept saying, "Oh, we want to try more stuff with Canada. We want to try more," because they deliver, right? They execute, right? We can count on them. And we ended up saying, "Stop. We don't have capacity. I need more bodies, right?"
Yeah.
And so yeah, and so those things I actually, you learn. Hey, would you learn? What would you do differently? And
Right.
so I actually embed that now into every time,
Yeah.
I take over a new team, right? I'm having to course correct as the teams of, when the team's 50, you can do it, 60, you can do it, now it's 500. So it's we're trying to think of it as a different operating model, and there's no planes, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, that is impressive. And it sounds like one of the foundations that you work on all the time is trust. It seems like you get in and you build trust. You trust them, but they also trust you. And then on top of the trust is when you start really working with them. So it seems like what I've heard as I've listened to you through this whole process is that seems to be a foundational component for you.
yeah, it's so much of this is relationship. So when I took over, the other thing I tend to do, two parts of that starting phase with me with teams is one, I do a journey line,
Yeah.
right? Which, if you haven't seen one, is kind of both personal and professional experience. And I'm very open in the journey line. I talk about, miscarrying a child. I talk about, the recent, deaths in my family. And then I talk about my successes and where I've struggled through the career, right? And people, you get mixed reactions. Like, some people are like, I didn't need to hear all that, but others are like, wow, now I've worked for all these leaders. I really don't know them as human beings, right? And then the next phase is, and it always freaks them out, especially when you're like, dealing with, not kids, but people who are very young and early in their careers.
Hmm.
And, an invite shows up for, a 30 or 45-minute one-on-one with me. And, they're all scrambling, like, what do I need to present? And it's, the way I treat it is like, I'm just looking to get to know you and what you do and in your business. I've done that always, taking over new teams, but I decided when I wasn't able to travel, it was
Yeah.
really critically important to check in on people during COVID,
Mm.
right? And so when my team was, North American based, I was, even the most junior people, like, hey, how you doing? Are you, like, what's your personal situation? Like, are you doing okay? Are you taking time for self?
Yes.
Right? You're not doing the like 9-10 hour straight of Zooms, which I
Hmm.
unfortunately just did again today. I'm not supposed to do, but you need to take those breaks, right? This is we unfortunately learned was a marathon and not a sprint, right? So
Right.
yeah, hopefully that gives you some more sense too.
Oh, yeah. Well, you sounds like you're also bringing that real human aspect to leading. So leaders aren't just these people that sit back in a big white ivory tower, whatever they call it. You're someone who shows up and sits with people and helps and supports them. So imagine that you must get fantastic results because they said most people who don't have a strong leader are actually looking for work elsewhere, right?
The term, I was with a CISO for a large US retailer,
Mhm.
2 months ago now, and the term he and his colleagues are using is it's a resignation pandemic,
Right.
right? So right now, even if you're a good company, I think 40% of individual contributors are looking to do what's next, and it's worse for leaders. It's 50 to 60. They're all burnt out, and
Yeah.
they've all just kind of had it, right?
Hmm.
And my opinion, is I don't see that changing until we really get back to face-to-face meetings. I just did my first one with colleagues, where we sat in a room 3 weeks ago now, and for a day, and
Hmm.
it was amazing. Like, it was amazing. We walked in there. I have a chief of staff and operations person now that support me, who are phenomenal. And four of us sat in a room and got so much done in a day.
Right.
And it was great. Everybody's been fully vaccinated, so you got to shake a hand or give a hug, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be important, right? Like, for this resignation pandemic,
Yeah.
as our world is this small, makes
Hmm.
it really really hard for culture, right? And so we continue to try to do what we do, right? Making sure we're checking in with teams and individuals and making sure we care and we want to get to know them and help them out, wherever we can.
Yeah.
But I don't think this slows down, my opinion, right? Until we're mostly back,
Yeah.
able to meet people in offices again. So
Yeah, well, that human connection can make all the difference. And we are only in this two-dimensional world right now. So we really need that connection with other people. So my last question for you is you've answered a little bit already, but what advice or guidance would you give to the people who are going to be going back and leading in this hybrid world? Because you've led this way for a long time.
Yeah.
You've led, remotely and then been able to connect with people. So you're very familiar with the hybrid environment, but many organizations, they've never done this. I literally was talking to somebody in a large government agency, and they said they had to go, when the pandemic hit, 5 days later, they're all working remotely, and they were told for 30 odd years before that, we could never work.
Never do it. Yeah. So
Never.
necessity, the mother of all invention, right?
Exactly. So what advice or guidance would you have for those people out there trying to figure this out?
So I think you have to acknowledge, we as leaders have to acknowledge that the world has been forever changed. Um, um, I have a close friend of mine who is an executive recruiter, and she was recruiting for I'll call it a white collar role,
Okay.
U.S. company coming to Canada, and very very well paying role. And they just said, hey, the one condition we have is we expect this person to be in the office 5 days a week. And she couldn't find a single person who would sign up to that, right? So I think in technology we've been very much a hybrid model for a long period of time. We wanted to be able to use the technology that we were promoting to customers was part of it, and always try to be on the front end of the curve. So I've been you know I've been had the ability to work from home, be on video for 22 years.
Yeah.
22 years I kind of been doing this. So this is
Mm.
very normal to me. But the one thing I would tell you is my opinion again is you can't live in either one of the extremes.
Right.
There's no going back 5 days a week, even if you're probably even running an inside sales team. I think they can do a lot of good work from home. And younger people, single moms, right? Lots of folks want that inherent flexibility, right? And but 100% remote in most instances is going to be tough. And there will be companies that decide to be 100% remote. I'd suggest figure out a way to inject some balance into it, whether the ad hoc meetings or something, just to maintain that that person-to-person connection, which I just think I continue to believe is so important. So
Well, thank you for that. Absolutely. So, thank you for spending the time with me today and talking about this. And I wonder if there's any final words of wisdom that you have around, coaching and that connection to sales leadership, particularly, because whether it's in technology or in any area of different organizations, I'd like to know what you think.
so just a couple of things. I think I touched on these, already. It's when you're in the coaching, be in the moment. Kind of like the advice you get with, they give advice to parents, right? They say, like, flip your laptop over and kind of be present, right?
Yes.
It's one thing to ask a question and then be looking at your text or your email, right? Like that. That's not you're not genuinely interested in me. So trying to remove those distractions.
Mhm.
I would advise you to get a framework, to
Yeah.
work with an agency like a Shift, to say, like, I gotta have somewhere to start, right? I gotta know or experience it myself, right? You can't just say I'm going to be a coach tomorrow without kind of anything to work with.
Right.
And then just be patient with yourself. Know that this is a journey, right? Like you start with something and you're like, okay, I tried to do a coaching conversation and that just didn't go well. Okay, well, what did you learn? What would you do differently, right? And just know it's a journey, and try to continue to make it part of who you are, and how you show up for your teams.
Mhm. Well, that's great advice. Thank you. And I think that's part of coaching is you have to practice. And I think it's practice makes perfect. Well, at least almost perfect, practically perfect. But I think that is one of the key things. And it works if you just stick with it,
Agreed.
right? Well, thank you, Sean. It's been so
Thank you,
lovely.
Sue.
Okay. Well, we'll say sign off.
Take
Bye.
care.